Nice to see you. It looks like you're in a beautiful place. Where are you?
I am under a 300-year-old oak tree on my deck in Malibu.
Not bad, sir. Not bad.
For my own mental health, I like to work outside and
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Hey, for
and
those taxes, you deserve to work outside.
oh man, that's a Pandora's box, right?
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. It's I like Malibu. Actually, I lived in Santa Monica for I did my PhD when I was living in Santa Monica.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
Oh,
one of my kids was born in Santa Monica Hospital, now UCLA Medical Center. So,
oh
yeah.
wow. Was
Yeah.
that the PhD in public policy?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. At the Rand Graduate School. So I was working at the Rand Corporation as a military analyst in those days. Yeah.
I mean, how did you get involved as a military analyst?
Well, I wanted to learn a lot of math because I needed to for my PhD. So I took a job doing applied mathematics in a sort of a secret facility doing theater level combat modeling. As an operations research guy for
Oh.
the Air Force. That's what I was doing, and I kind of learned by doing as OJT. Learned a lot during that period. It was hard at first. It was hard and scary, but you know, where there's a will, there's a way. I needed to learn,
Hmm.
so yeah,
Right. Well,
yeah.
there's a certain level I've been aware of this in certain things and projects too that I'm like, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's a level of fear. Like I certainly, but I still end up doing things.
Yeah.
But there's a level of fear that is, I don't know if it's fear or just like you just don't know. And there's
Yeah.
so, you know, there's a lot of jewels within that, right?
Oh, for sure. Fear is a great indicator that there's something afoot that's important. That's not to be avoided, but something to lean into ordinarily. I mean, not to be foolish about these things, not to take foolish risks, but fear is a great indicator that there's something going on under the surface. Yeah.
And how would you then, because obviously unstable surfaces and foundations certainly have been apropos of the last few years, and paralysis of fear, and where our judgments can get askew. Like, from your perspective, like, what's a good way to have this good ally as fear, and like being able to see it, but also not being frozen to it so that you don't actually move forward?
I talk about that a lot with my students at HBS, actually, because we all have fears. The difference between people who are very successful and people who aren't is not that the successful people are fearless. What they are is they're very good at managing their fear. And that means the way to do that is to not, I mean, with any feelings, fear is one of the basic negative emotions. It's produced in the limbic system of the brain. The other three being uh, disgust, anger, and sadness are the other three negative emotions. And you can be managed by them or you can manage them. And the way to manage your emotions is to move the experience of those emotions from the limbic system into the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And the way that you do that is, I mean, a lot of techniques for doing it. Journaling does that, meditation does that, therapy does that, or just basically saying, I'm feeling fear right now. I wonder why I'm feeling fear. And in so doing, you're making it metacognitive and you're committing yourself to the management of that fear. Learning how to do that automatically doesn't mean you're not going to feel fear. It means you're not going to be paralyzed by that fear and you're going to look for the opportunity within that fear. And that's what I train my students to become very good at. That's a process called metacognition.
Metacognition. New
Yeah.
term, new term
Yeah.
today.
Yeah,
Epic.
yeah. And if you're married, are you married? Are you a married man?
I'm not. I
Okay.
was at one point.
Oh yeah. So if you're married and you have a good partnership, then you can actually master all kinds of things together, and that's very potent. That's called joint metacognition, where you're working on something together, where you sort of wire your batteries together to understand something that would just be sort of subliminal and liminal, sort of in limbic, and you make it and you bring it up to the surface and consider it together. And so what you're effectively doing is you're metacognitive individually, but in discussing it together, you come up with all kinds of ways to manage these things consciously that you wouldn't otherwise. You can just you can wipe out fear. I mean, you can utterly dominate fear that way, especially if you have a
Wow.
partner.
And and does that? I have a men's group, very 5 years. We got a professional who's also our friend now, but certainly no bullshit. Like everyone knows everyone's patterns. We meet on a regular basis. Are things like that, I would imagine, fit somewhat into that category?
They can, although the key thing is it's important that both partners be feeling the same thing. So it's not that one is counseling the other. That's a good way. I mean, getting counseling, getting therapy, even from a friend, is a way to become more metacognitive. But joint metacognition is particularly potent when you're both feeling the same thing and trying to dominate it together and sharing ideas on how you might do so, getting feedback from each other on how to
Mm.
do that. So that's why marriages are an ideal way to do it. But a super close friend, you're worried about the same thing. I'm worried about, whatever. The problem is with a lot of friends, they're worried about things that, are really not worth you being afraid of. Like, what if Trump wins the next election? That's just not, that's beneath, the metacognition challenge.
Right. And so that metacognition or the issue, give me some good examples of that. It's got to be pretty acute, got to be hitting you kind of square in your life, in your day-to-day life kind of thing, and you're chewing on, could be inflation, could be rent, it could be potentially something like that.
It could be, although it's actually more, it's better that it be very quite personal and touching you acutely, as you mentioned, such as it's not a question of inflation or rent, it's a question of economic insecurity. I
Sure.
don't feel secure. Okay, let's get to the root of that. Why do you not feel, why are we feeling economically insecure? Well, because we don't have enough money. No, because we're worried, well, what will happen if we run out of money? What will happen? Let's walk all the way through that. Let's make contingency plans. Let's think about ways that we can mitigate that fear with different kinds of actions. And in so doing, this you're bringing it to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And the problem is this one is a phantasm.
Mm.
When it's like, it's something you can't, it's like, it's really, really bad. It's so bad, I'm not going to think about it. Then it's going to just freak you out forever,
Right.
basically. And when you bring it out, like get the ghost out of your head, put the ghost between you and your partner, and if you don't have a partner, just in front of you, and then analyze it. It's like, let's talk about you, ghost. Let's talk
Right.
about, what are you doing? Like, what are you so, why are you so scary? That doesn't mean you shouldn't be scared. I mean, fear is a normal thing. And running out of money and becoming homeless, no joke, man. I mean, but at the same time, we catastrophize all day long, every day. And metacognition will let you get around the catastrophization that can be an enormous barrier to your progress and to your ability to act.
Right, and that's kind of like this, there's a level of addiction to the stories and the phantasm, as you call it. Like there, and what I love about what you're saying is that even if from a strong partnership, obviously epic, but also just from a journaling perspective, bringing that out of the closet and into a place where you now can chew on it and look at it and demystify some of this, the fear itself is the fear, right?
Right,
So it's
right. Yeah, no, it's true. And one of the things that people will notice who are highly limbic, and so they're not metacognitive at all. They'll notice that something's really, really, really bugging them, and they can't quite say what it is because they haven't done the work.
mm-hmm.
And so when something's bugging you, that's when you actually have to sit down, get out your pen and paper. I journal a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then I burn it, right? Because all that matters is that you get it onto paper, because in getting it into paper, you're moving it to your prefrontal cortex, and that's where you want it. And then when you do that, you say, yeah, that thing happened to me and that thing happened to me. It's usually pretty funny as opposed to really bothering me. But ordinarily what it is, there's a lot of ego threats, for example. You thought you were Mr. Big, and it turns out that somebody treated you with disrespect, or you got rejected for something, or something fell through. And when you think everything's falling into line, and then things aren't, that threat to you is inchoate. It feels like a threat to your security, to your success, to your ability to support yourself and other people. And then when you write it down, you recognize ordinarily that this is just the course of ordinary life. It looks like somebody else's life when you write it down, because you assess everybody else's life with your prefrontal cortex. I don't assess your life with my limbic system. I assess your life like, and if you told me about something that's going wrong in your life, I go, oh yeah, that happens to people all the time. and here's how somebody else dealt with it. Here's how somebody else did. And actually, it's kind of funny, right? And like that's using your executive function. That's using your CEO brain. So you need to do that. You need to simulate that by actually writing this down, and it's very helpful.
And that in and of itself is a practice, right? just
Yeah.
just the act of doing it. And then I can imagine the radical honesty of yourself just becomes more and more as a tool, that nothing is happening to you, that it is a tool of opportunity that maybe you don't quite see, but through the practice of it builds this alliance, that fear is not here to crush your kingdom, but in order to maybe build a better one with different bricks that you are trying to curate along the way. But this practice is an essential, right?
Yeah. So if you want to manage yourself, if you want to build a good life, it's super essential to do this. Now, and that's just one of the four negative emotions. The others are disgust, fear, and sadness, which are the same kind of signals within life's opportunities. And then if you're a ninja, if you're like the master of this stuff, then you start managing your positive emotions as well. Because your basic positive emotions are love and joy and interest. Interest is a positive emotion. So people are listening to us and they're like, gosh, that's such an interesting conversation. That's because your brain, your Pleistocene brain, is rewarding you for some information that actually might make you more likely to get food or find a mate. That's basically what's going on. That's the reason that we're attracted to things that are interesting. That we get dopamine dopamine makes you acutely interested in stuff and maintains your interest in things. That's, people will use Ritalin or Vyvanse or modafinil to keep their dopamine levels very high in the prefrontal cortex to keep you super interested, because interest is so pleasurable. And interest is pleasurable because the ancient brain says, go make sure that you're interested in things, the things that will actually make you better, more likely to survive, more likely to eat, more likely to have 75 offspring. Now, we don't use it for that now because we don't want 75 kids, and we have all to eat that we need. Most of us do, thank God. So we can use them for other things like lifting other people up, like helping to make the world a better place. But if you're going to harness that appropriately, you need to make your basic positive emotions of love, joy, and interest as metacognitive as you do your negative emotions. And then you're really becoming you're at the 33rd secret level of masterdom of this stuff. Or whatever. I just made that up. I don't want anybody to write that down and Google it because that means nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a messianic symbol.
Yeah. No, I'm not a Mason. I'm a Catholic. Anyway, but yeah.
Yeah. So don't get caught on the 33rd. That's funny. But I think I've never heard anyone say it, or at least I didn't. It didn't click. And equally as important, to acknowledge those good emotions.
Right.
Equally important to acknowledge, hey man, I'm interested in this thing, or I'm interested in this book, or I'm interested in this art, or I'm interested in my life, or I'm interested even in pursuing this goal, or hey man, I'm having joy right now, and 2.5 years I haven't had enough of it, so it's good to acknowledge. That's a really, I think, subtle but powerful nuance to understanding the spectrum.
Yeah. You don't want to be managed by your positive emotions. You really don't want to be managed by your negative emotions, because then you'll be a reactive person, a highly reactive person. That's why we say to our kids, you have kids, right?
I don't. I have 2 dogs.
Okay. If you had kids and they're little, you're always like, use your words. And the reason is what you're telling them to do is to articulate their feelings, right, to make themselves metacognitive, despite the fact that their prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped. Your prefrontal cortex is not really fully developed until you're in your early to mid 20s. But little kids can get better at it. Now, that's really essential for negative emotions, because you don't want to be a negative reactive person. But if you actually want to have the most effective and enjoyable life, you need to manage your positive emotions as well. If you're being managed by your positive emotions, you're going to be bobbing along like a cork in the ocean all the time, which is like, I felt good, don't know why. And then you'll be all about pleasure and not about enjoyment. Enjoyment is a conscious pleasure. It's a because pleasure happens to you. Enjoyment is something that you can manage. So eating a great dinner gives you, it tastes good, which is pleasurable, and it fills up your belly, which is pleasurable. But if you're enjoying the dinner with your friends, and so it's a memory that you can actually take some joy in again and again and again and again. That's because you made it metacognitive and you're managing it in this particular way. So this is a way that if we can basically say, for example, I get these positive feelings and I want to understand why I'm getting these positive feelings, you can get them more often, but you also can channel them to really productive ends. If you're getting positive emotions or pleasure, which is related to positive emotions, from pornography or something, it's very important to be conscious of that so that you can say what's going on here and try to rechannel that into something that's societally productive and not bad for you. A lot of addictions come because we're being managed by our positive emotions. And nobody ever says, that what I really, really love? My addiction. Nobody's ever said that before, right?
Right.
But that's unmanaged positive emotions generally that are leading us to these addiction problems.
Is that why, from an AA perspective, when you share and other people understand and can relate, is that why that's so effective? Because I know my father suffered from addiction and he lost his life as a result of it. And what happens is, and he also worked the program for 30
Yeah.
years, but then at a certain point, it becomes this silo, and you realize he's squeezing himself into a silo, and then right alongside that, the cousin of that look was, I am suffering and no one knows what that's like, and therefore I'm creating this deepening story that's making him feel worse and worse and worse, and divorcing all of those systems that was once working for 30 years.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. There's a lot packed into what you're talking about. But the whole point is that what AA or what any 12-step program is trying to do is to make you, among other things, much more metacognitive of the limbic phenomenon of your addiction, where your dopamine is neurochemically, you're completely out of control, but at the same time you're not able to manage it, it's managing you. And this is one of the reasons that at the beginning of the 12-step program, you say, my life has become unmanageable. That's the same thing as saying that my limbic system is in charge. My limbic system is driving my bus, and I'm tired of having that stupid limbic system because that's just really not. This is all instinct at this point, and I can't live this way anymore. Yeah. And so it's a step-by-step program of this kind of. It's really a very beautiful and very spiritual metacognition. Now, one of the problems is that some people will substitute that for actually dealing with a lot of the underlying problems, and we see this a great deal. There's a phenomenon in the addiction literature called the dry drunk. I don't know if you've ever heard of the dry drunk.
That's what my dad was for the 30 years.
Yeah, so your dad was basically a pissed off sober guy, right?
Yep.
And that's classic. I mean, the reason he was drinking in the first place is he was dealing with anger and trauma and all these negative basic emotions, which he was treating, self-medicating with the alcohol. And once he got the alcohol under control with a 12-step program, he still had the underlying problems. That's the dry drunk phenomenon, the dry drunk syndrome. And so you have to deal with everything. You don't deal just with the illness that you provoked on the basis of your self-medication. Deal with the illness that underlies that self-medication in the first place. It's a trick, man. Human life is a tricky business.
Oh man. I mean, as you're talking, it's like there's so much. I love this conversation, by the way. I love these kind of nuances. I love the phenomenon of life, in the sense that we're for me, I feel like I'm just, seeking's not the right word, but kind of uncovering the truth, or uncovering who I really am, right? Aside from all of these weather patterns of emotions and experiences and all of that stuff, even though that can point to many things and can lead us along the way, but certainly that nuance of the enlightenment of the discovery of, like, I'm just so curious. The thing that pops in my mind as I'm saying that is, like, you have such an interesting freaking background. You have the classic musician the economics BA, then the policy PhD, the military stuff, and then you're writing a columnist to how to build a life, and then we're just jumped into this limbic conversation. Like, dude, it's like I feel like I could talk to you for about a week
Yeah,
and
there's so
go
much. There's so
like
much.
how did you end up at this place? And then I love about the I want to dive into this book, Strength to Strength, but like how to build a life and
Yeah.
how to do, like, how did you end up here? How was that
Yeah.
seeking for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody listening to us has got this weird path. I mean, this is one of the great things about being an American.
Uh,
No, a great thing about being a human is that,
uh,
you take these weird, long, and winding paths, and some of them are just cosmetically stranger, like mine. But some of them, you scratch the surface in anybody's life, you're like, what? You did what?
yeah.
You made what decision? Weird, man. And it's a real adventure, I have to say. Well, for me, I started off in the classical music business because that's what I did as a kid. That's all. My parents were very ambitious for me as a French horn player. Believe it or not, I mean, everybody's got issues, man. And I was good as a French horn player, and it was I had an opportunity I went to Cal Arts, which is up the road from where you
Of
live.
course, yeah.
I finished a solid 9 months before they encouraged me to earn my success outside the institution, and so I went pro. And when I was 19, and I went and I all the way through my 20s. My parents called it my gap decade. And it was sort of funny. My dad was a college professor. My grandfather was a college professor. So, skipping higher ed was not their first choice. But and then when I was on the road as a classical musician, I started to have these questions just about the why I thought the things I did, why the world worked the way it did, how humans actually worked. And so I went back and got my bachelor's degree by correspondence in economics, which is a very powerful toolkit for behavior. I mean, people think of it as like inflation rates and the interest rate and the Fed. No, no, no. The interesting parts of economics are why humans do the way they do, and giving you the statistical tools to look at patterns in human behavior. So I got good quantitatively. And then I thought if I could develop ways to help people through public policy, it'd be even better. Got my PhD on that. But fundamentally, I'm just a behavioral social scientist. And, I did that. I taught that stuff for 10 years. And then I went and I ran a think tank for 10 years. And at the end of that, I thought, well, what am I going to do? I was in my mid 50s for the rest of my life. And I decided I was going to spend the rest of my life using my ideas to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love. So I left, and now I teach at Harvard. I teach science of happiness classes at Harvard, and I write about it for a popular audience. And I'm telling you, man, whew, life's good.
Wow. The
Yeah,
science of happiness at
yeah,
Harvard. Like,
yeah,
just that alone.
yeah,
Like, what?
yeah. Beats
Like,
working. Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
it's really great.
you couldn't even, and that's the thing. Like, there's this, the thing that bounces up in my head is this idea, and it's still around, I think, and maybe I'm wrong in the Gen Z world, but it's like, what are you going to do with your life?
Yeah,
I have my own twists and turns. There's no freaking way I could have said, oh yeah, that's what I want to do, because there's no way to unpack everything that the road showed along the way, and until you're actually there. But in that process, we have to make choices,
yeah.
and those things open up other doors that you have to be there to open the door in order for new information to come in. So, like, what's your thought on like goals, intentions, and things like that when you're kind of looking at someone who wants to build their life?
Yeah. So tell me, as I answer that question, what are the two most different major things that you've done in your life, either for a living or just as you're sort of vocationally, and then tell me what those two things actually have in common.
I ended up being a superfood hunter. So I ran around the planet in about 35 countries, finding herbs and nuts and fruits, and
Uh huh.
develop products, and
Yeah, as an
became,
entrepreneur. Yeah, as a really
yeah,
successful entrepreneur doing
yeah,
superfoods. So
yeah.
what was the most different thing that you did than that?
Yeah, like later in life, Um, I mean, I think the things I did a TV show,
Uh-huh.
and I wrote a book,
Yeah.
and writing books. I mean, I think that's,
And you have a big popular podcast.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
became a communicator about life's
yeah,
big ideas. So what
yeah.
is superfoods and life's big ideas? What's the through line in your life between those two things?
I
What
think
do they
that
have in common? What's your mission that's the same between those two things?
I think it became quite clear to me because I realized even in superfood hunting, it wasn't even about finding the best elixir in the world. It was about the environment, the indigenous people getting exposed to many things in the world that I was like, why don't these people have clean water? Why? So the through line was, the mission was about connecting dots on solving some issues. So it became about the indigenous people, it became about the environment, it became about health, it became about water, power, food, shelter, it became about sovereignty, it became
Mm.
it became all of these kind of things, which is also why I love even this type of conversation, because the sovereignty within oneself and the liberation of freedom. So I guess now even talking, I mean, it's really about less suffering.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I look at these things and that you're telling me, and it sounds to me like serving people who need you, serving others, using ideas, using information to serve other people. And you're doing that with respect to the health that they can have, but also the sustainability of their culture and their environment. And now you're doing it in various forms of media to surface some of the biggest ideas for the people who are listening to you. Your superfood hunting thing and your podcasting career are really not that different with respect to your personal values-based mission. And that's the answer to the question for young people. They shouldn't have to figure out, am I going to be a podcaster or a superfood hunter? The answer is maybe yes, maybe no, maybe neither. You got to figure out what your moral mission in life is.
yeah,
That's the most important thing, because that's going to manifest itself in a whole bunch of different ways if you let it. But if you don't actually know what you care about, if you don't actually discern what makes you tick in terms of your values, then you're going to kind of bop around and feel kind of aimless and not kind of know why you're doing what you're doing. And sometimes you're going to be like, I guess I'm just doing it for the money. I'm not quite sure. And that's what a lot of young people today, that's the problem that they have, is they've been encouraged to be ambitious on the worldly aspects of what they do, but to not be morally ambitious, not to actually be clear on the values that they have behind it. That's the thing for people to be figuring out.
morally ambitious. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah, and the one mistake that a lot of people, Gen Z and millennial people who are listening to this, are going to mistake they might make, is thinking I'm saying that you got to be really clear in your politics. That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. Morally ambitious is, what do you think that is important for you to earn your success and serve others? What does it mean? Don't tell me about I'm going to work for the Republican National Committee or the Democrats, or I'm going to try to defeat Donald Trump, or blah 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 blah. No, 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 no. Fine, do those things, but it's much deeper than politics. And a lot of people are substituting politics for sort of the deep morality that actually should undergird our lives. Frankly, a lot of people are substituting politics for their spiritual lives, and politics makes a very, very bad religion.
Oof. Yeah, it becomes so, well, it is religiousness,
Yeah, it's
right?
horrible. Like
Yeah.
cancel culture is all like it's like this weird. It's like a moral crusade or something based on the religion of politics. It's I sit on a campus. I see it all the time. Right? It's such a
Yeah.
waste. Such a
And
waste.
the,
Yeah.
and the thing that's, I mean, without, you know, completely pulling that box apart, it's that whole thing of, you need to, if you change the way you be, do, speak, then I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like saying, like, I have a master's in psychology. Putzed around with psychology. I've tried to dig into this myself for the last 35 years, and it's like, I don't know about you, but you're trying to change the world so you feel better.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the path, man. You know, I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah, yeah.
kind of the opposite.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I know. It's the whole idea of like to make sure that your tires never pop, you get cement tires, but then you got to put down a rubber road. Yeah, and it's like I think it's better to take the risk of your tires. It seems like it's a little bit
Right.
more cost effective and efficient to do it that way. And for sure, it's the case that everybody wants to change the whole world as opposed to themselves. But when we're talking about metacognition and self management, we're talking about fixing ourselves so that we can be resilient to all the stuff that life throws at us. To see many of the suffering, a lot of the suffering that we get in life is actually a source of sacredness, which you need to actually find your life's meaning. And those lessons are non-trivial, and unfortunately, those are not the lessons that the culture naturally teaches us. It says, you know, think the right things, fall in line, make a bunch of money, hate the people who disagree with you. I mean, all that dumb stuff that
Right.
people don't. I guess they probably always learn that, but higher consciousness can transcend it.
Yeah, and it's funny that we're even pouring more fuel on the fire of that stuff when even now it's
Yeah,
like
I know.
what is happening, and you know, that embracing of, and I think this has been levels in my life, but that realization, several realizations along the way, going, number one, nothing is happening to me, right? So there's an opportunity they may or may not see yet. But in fact, what are your thoughts around, you know, the shadow, the darkness, the challenges, the things that we get hit with that is not planned? I perceive it as the propeller. It certainly propels this part of reality forward, right? It if I wasn't strained and stressed about how getting out of college and have to pay for this, I wouldn't be aggressively looking for what I'm going to do. And you know what I mean? It's like, so there's a certain a part of embracing this challenge that is here for us. It's not
Yeah.
against us, right? What are your
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, this is an important point. I mean, a very, very deep point that you're making. Back in the '60s, which you and I don't remember, but we've heard an awful lot about. There was this thing called the Woodstock Festival that we've all heard of, and the motto of the Woodstock Festival is that if it feels good, do it. Right. And the only memory I have of that in 1969 was this grainy black and white Zenith TV that we had in our living room. I grew up in Seattle, and so it's a lower middle class neighborhood. And I remember my dad seeing Walter Cronkite interviewing a hippie who says, "If it feels good, do it." My dad's like, "That's the end of America," you know.
right?
And that was actually advice for useful idiots, because the truth is Mother Nature wants you to be highly reactive. Mother Nature wants you just to be to chase money and power and pleasure and fame. That's what Mother Nature wants. Now, don't blame capitalism. That's the limbic system of your brain that's impelling that. Capitalism is just a massive extension of the limbic system of your brain, right? And don't blame Fox News and MSNBC for firing you up to hate other people because of your politics. They're taking signals from your demand, man. And so the key thing of all of this is that we need to reject these things. Now, the modern version of "it feels good, do it" is if it feels bad, make it stop. If it feels bad, treat it. If it feels bad, make it go away. And on college campuses, if you're feeling anxiety and sadness, which is very normal, that, and especially you come to Harvard University, it's like it's not a spa. It's more like a mental Rolfing for 4 years, right? I mean, it's like it's and of course, but the problem is that it's very easy for adults to give young people this advice that all suffering is bad suffering and it has to be treated. And that's actually, I understand that too much is too much. I mean, there can be clinical problems like major depressive disorder and clinical anxiety. I got it. I mean, you got to treat these things because they're real medical issues. But every life has a lot of suffering. Every life has stress. Every life has sadness. Every life has loss. And the sooner that we understand that those are the moments where we find our resiliency, our growth, when we find out what we're made of, that's really when we're going to start to prosper. And people who run away from those things and who try to make their suffering go away, paradoxically, what they're actually avoiding is a sense of meaning. And meaning is one of the great macronutrients of happiness. Happiness is a combination of enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. And if you run away from your suffering, you're not going to get meaning. And so in avoiding your unhappiness, paradoxically, you're avoiding your happiness, which is a very important lesson. I've tried to impart this to my own. I have 3 adult kids, and we wind up talking about this a lot.
Wow. Dude, that's just like mind blower right there in the sense that the way you put that, because at our core, right, we require meaning in this life, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have to. And again, the accelerator or the initiator or the uncoverer is that stress and strain and being pushed and mother nature coming at you, life coming at you. And it's like, I think, I look back at my life, I was, not not to go all the way back, I bring it back because my father saw me suffer at the moment of birth when in 1970 I was 3.5 pounds 2 months early. And before he passed away, he went into this story. It was this moment him and I had where he saw these other things that I was accomplishing, because he didn't see it as Darren's just getting all this stuff. He saw Darren from the moment of birth almost die, and then always try to find, whenever he would get hit with strain or stress or challenges, he would figure out a way. And that was one of the greatest gifts. Talk about metacognition. My father helped me with that metacognition of kind of the DNA that I've been practicing for a long time. The moment I became fully cognitive of what I was doing, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah.
I wouldn't change the suffering. I wouldn't change it all. Like, hell, I'm sitting here right now. This whole property, I lost everything. A fire went through here in 2018, and I will tell you, from my soul to your soul, I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah.
Because it gave me so much of deepening within myself and other things. So I think what you're saying is so freaking powerful and so misunderstood and underutilized.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's normal to not want to suffer. Again, our animal nature is to avoid suffering. Your dog doesn't want to suffer. Amoeba will go away from freezing cold or burning heat, because they don't want to suffer. They don't want to do anything that indicates they might be under threat. They might be under risk. But people who do, because look, it's inevitable, and who survive, which you did. And everybody who's listening to us who has suffered and still is with us has survived as well, that they get, if they allow it to happen, there's a thing in our field, in social science, behavioral social science, called fading affect bias, which is when something is in the rearview mirror, you always remember it better than it was, because you remember what you learned from it. And you're talking about the 2018 fires, Malibu Canyon fires right now, which, man, that was like literally hell on earth. And now you're saying, I learned a lot and I survived it, which with fading affect bias, you are now a beneficiary of these things that you learned. This is incredibly important, because that's a special case of what we call post-traumatic growth. You always talk about post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, et cetera. That's real. But post-traumatic growth is actually more common. And what it is these superpowers that you get from trauma itself. There's a whole bunch of them. People tend to become spiritually more adept. They tend to get deeper relationships as a result of it. And here's the big superpower. They care less what other people think. That's the most amazing thing. It's like if you get cancer and survive, it's very unlikely that you're going to be like, yeah, I wonder if she thinks I'm, dumb looking because I'm bald. Like, you don't care. That's it. Because, and it's funny, because you talk to people who've had these bad experiences, these near-death experiences, literally for the rest of their life, they feel like they've got this protective capacity. Social comparison of these things have greatly attenuated as a result of this. Okay, so what does this mean? Does this mean that you should go out and hope you get cancer? No. But suffering's going to find you. The question is, how do you lean into it so that you can get this incredible post-traumatic growth as a result of it? And the less you resist, the better off you're going to be.
And it goes back to how we originally started. Something's going on, turn into it, journal, find someone to talk to, start processing this stuff so that it doesn't become, because I think the danger, i.e., I have cancer or whatever disease that's suppressed and pushed down. I had a friend, the reason I'm saying this, and not saying that all cancer is this, but I had a friend who passed away in Colorado. She was like my second mother. When I came out of college, she was this kind of teacher that
Right.
became a very close friend of mine. And she was on her deathbed. And I was in the hospital. It's just her and I. She turns to me because she knows we had this connection. She was literally giving me my first metaphysical books and like, here, read this, open your mind. She turns to me and she says, I know why I have cancer. I was like, really? Like what? And she says, the anger and resentment I've been holding on towards my husband. I know it, I feel it, and this is what caused this thing, right? So it's the antithesis of turning into something and liberating the very thing that if we swallow it, if we pretend it isn't there, is, I call it dangerous.
Yeah.
Maybe not to that degree, or maybe a worse degree.
Yeah.
Who the hell knows? And there's no possible way I can understand that, the great mystery of that. However, that that moment for me was so powerful because 2 days later she was gone.
Hmm.
Right. So it's like, to the what degree, I talked to this other doctor friend of mine who deals with high level challenges and cancers and things like that. I said, how many diseases or challenges you find with people are emotional? He goes,
Hmm.
every one of them have an emotional component to some sort of disease.
Yeah, I
That
believe it.
was, you know,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I
so
believe it. Absolutely. Now, this is not to say that people are bringing these cancers upon themselves,
right,
but to separate out the cognitive, the emotional, the physical, and to separate all these processes. I mean, look, there's a reason that people say that the psychological is biological.
right,
You
right,
know, that there is we are an organism, and it's an integrated set of systems that we have, and we need to take on all of them is the key thing. You know, people who are actually not trying to solve, to use the tools at their disposal to solve their emotional and psychological problems, and at the same time we're just hoping for medical intervention that will give them relief, are fooling themselves. You have to treat yourself in a holistic way, and the good news is that you can.
right. Yeah, so you've been writing about this stuff and dedicating your life. And so, when you ran I mean, dude, I can't even possibly understand how you wrote 12 books. I'm on my second one and I'm in, you know, I'm in deep labor right now
Are
trying
you
to
in the pit of despair? Is it,
oh
you remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's her famous book on death and dying?
yes.
Yeah, that's like writing a book. So there's like
Oh
these
my God.
stages that you got to go through. It's like bargaining,
Oh,
denial, rage,
so
and
true.
finally acceptance. So you'll get to acceptance, Darren. I promise.
Oh my God. And it's funny because the first book, it's almost like giving, listen, I'm facetiously using birth because I'll never know what it's like. But
Yeah,
that said, you give birth to one and you forget what it was like. And so
yeah.
then you do
I know.
another one.
I
And this
know. I
other
know.
one was more, it's on fatal conveniences. It's on problem solution, the insane things we're doing from, putting, endocrine disruptors in our clothing and our home products and like it's crazy. And each chapter is its own book. And I was insane to be able to think I was gonna do this. And of course I'm still doing it, but each chapter is consuming, 4 or 5 books, 100+ articles just to be able to understand it, to condense it down into something that's digestible.
Yep.
And I'm just going, what the? So I'm literally at that point where I'm in deep labor right
Yeah, I
now.
got it.
But so but again, like I was just telling my girlfriend, it's like it's so rewarding to be reading and learning, and to be able to, even though you've got pressure and you got publishers and all of this stuff, but the essence of it, of learning, and the diving in and peeling open things that I didn't even know, right? And so then you get to chew on that. I guess my
Yeah.
long way of getting there, but first I want to hear what you have to say
Well,
about
no, it's important. You just made a very important point, a very profound point for all the young people who are listening to us today, because we were talking about how to, how to get started in the right way, and we talked about mission versus specific jobs. But there's something else, which is that you have this intention to write a book, but what you're really getting the juice for is the process of doing so. You're enjoying the journey along the way. This is critically important. You don't know if, it's funny because, a lot of people will write a book, for example. It's a perfect example of a particular principle of, I'm not going to get satisfaction until I have a book that's done, and then only if it sells a lot of copies. Well, guess what? You're not going to be satisfied. And even if it does really well, you're going to get like a minute of satisfaction, and then you're going to be jumping right back on that treadmill. Oh, now a 2-book deal. Now, whatever it happens to be. And probably nobody's going to buy your book. I mean, probably. I mean, even celebrated authors, probably nobody's going to buy your book. If you don't enjoy it, don't do it, is the bottom line. And so for you, the reward is the learning. The reward is this incredible stuff, this library of information that you're actually be able to bring to bear in your show, in your relationships, in the interactions that you have with other people. And that's the thing with everybody. If you don't like what you have to do at work all day, but you're doing it for something at the end of the day, that's a big problem. And I get it. We all got to make a living. We all got to pay our rent. I get it. But the truth of the matter is that there's enough opportunity for almost everybody that we don't have to subjugate ourselves, that we don't have to objectify ourselves in a way that chains us to a long, and largely illusory goal.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so important. And at the same time, talk a little bit about this, because clearly not all aspects of doing this is enjoyable, right?
Sure.
So like
Yeah.
if I can just sit there and go, I thank God I'm in a position where, you get in advance and you've got a little freedom to learn. If I could just learn and not complete the book, that would be probably even better. But but
But
but
you wouldn't do it.
right, you wouldn't do it.
You
For
wouldn't do
sure.
it because you
Right.
got to have a goal.
Yeah.
And the whole point is actually what, Deepak Chopra talks about, this idea of intention without attachment. And he talks about it in a very spiritual way, but it has a good neuroscientific basis where to do something, you have to know you're going towards something. You have to have an intention. But to enjoy yourself and to get the maximum amount of benefit from it, you must become detached from that goal. Why? Because, look, there's three things that the human brain can do, or 3 states. There's 3 times that the human brain can be in at any one time. There's the past, there's the future, and there's right now, right? And so we call this, if you're always thinking about the future, which, a lot of young people who are ambitious and curious, they're listening to your podcast because you get a lot of good ideas from it. That they're very prospective. The future, the future, the future, the future, the future. That's called homo prospectus. You're the future man or woman. Retrospective people are stuck in the past. Mindful people are actually thinking about the present, and that's the hardest thing for humans to do because we're built for time travel, kind of. The problem is when you're only in the future of these goals and you're not in the moment of actually pursuing these goals, you're going to have trouble. And the way to attain that is to have an intention about the future, but then to live in day-tight containers. Right, and the way to do that, there's a very simple way to do this that I assign to my students, my master's students. I say, okay, imagine yourself in 10 years. Imagine where you want to be with your relationships and your career and the whole thing. Okay, now think, where do I need to be in 5 years to get to the 10 years? Where do I need to be in 1 year to get to the 5 years? What do I need to be in 1 month to get to the 1 year? And what do I need to do today to get to the month? And only think about that day. That's living in a day-tight container, and you will enjoy your life if you do that.
Dude, that's good. That's good. Because I think I slip. I do. I can dream, I can intend, and all of that stuff. And sometimes at the end of the day, I'm like, God damn it, I didn't get enough done.
Yep.
right? And I slip into that, and then I get over, like, I didn't take a day off for a year, right? Because with this book during the week, with everything else I got going on, I could never really get those stretches that
Yeah.
you need to get a book done. Like, I got shit, you got to shut these things off because you got to go into a different gear.
Yeah.
And I could only get into that gear on Saturdays and Sundays. And my girlfriend was like, "Hey, you have to take a day off. I know you've got great excuses. How do you prevent, and this is more of a personal question. I got ambitions, dude. I've got a lot of things that I am excited about, but I will also take on tons of stuff.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I crush myself
Yeah.
in how much to do in order to attain the 75 things that I want to see in 10 years."
Well, that's called the tyranny of the more, and that requires the discipline of less. There's a really interesting book called Subtract by an engineering professor at University of Virginia, a guy named Leidy Klotz. And I was just interviewing him for my show, and he's a very interesting guy because he talks about how much happier you get when you subtract things from your life. Now, the discipline of that is that you got to go against Mother Nature, because Mother Nature wants you to be like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll eat that. Yeah, I'll put that in my mouth. I mean, yeah, give me more of that. And pretty soon your whole life is larded up and your schedule has become unmanageable. But the key thing to remember is that after a certain point, this is one of the things I talk about with my staff. I say, like, no more additions, only substitutions. That's all we can do is substitutions. We've got a certain amount of time. And furthermore, I got to block certain times off. I don't take any meetings in the morning, ever, unless I'm like on the plane or something like that. And then actually it's great because nobody can bug me on the plane. And the reason is because I got to do creative work every day. This is non-negotiable. I've taken out all that stuff from my schedule because otherwise I'm miserable. I don't actually get to the thing that is my intention. And that's a big problem. That's your basic tendencies for more have made it impossible for you to do what you're supposed to be doing, which is your metaphysical you-ness, which is manifest in something like this next book, which is supposed to help other. By the way, what's your book about? What's the next book about? I can't wait.
It's called Fatal Conveniences.
Oh boy, I love it.
So it actually was gifted by my father. So this sets up the thing. So my father in the 90s. So I'll just tell you the whole story since we're on a long form podcast. So my father was a keeper of the dragon in the Cuban Missile Crisis. So he worked on atomic bombs.
Wow.
He lost his thyroid because, of course, the
radioactivity.
radiation.
Yeah.
And so he was susceptible. In the 90s, he became super sensitive to chemicals of any kind, even shirts, dyes, shampoos, deodorants, carpets, couches, paints, you name it. Couldn't be around it. And he was, we share this, he was a professor at the University of Minnesota. And so he thrived around teaching and being around people and all of that stuff. Well, he went back to school. I'm just going to be a counselor, or I'm going to kind of mitigate that. And eventually he had to retire because he couldn't educate the world of going, hey, you can't put that on if you're going to be around me. So in order to be around him, I had to find products that didn't have chemicals or didn't have artificial phthalates or anything else in them.
Wow.
So now, later, I've been practicing and learning these things that in our modern day life we may have gotten used to, but are really harming us on a chronic big scale. So I have chapters on personal care. I have chapters on cosmetics. I have chapters on scary research on EMFs, from even almost as if they were chemicals, from endocrine disruption to free radical activation to immune system overworking, like all of this stuff, plus the fast fashion and all of these things. So each one of those and many more are these things that classic is, a convenience to put a phone up to your head, but it's really really bad idea. So that kind of thing you can, and of course the food systems, produce, uh, pesticides, herbicides, all of the stuff that is embedded within our modern world. And yet we're allowing this stuff to happen. Regulatory bodies are not, from my perspective, doing a very good job at all. So my part in this is let's educate people so that they, and of course always leaving people with a solution, right? Here's the solution. Here we just uncovered it. Here's now a solution
Mm,
for said problem. So
that's great. I can't wait to buy it. No, seriously, I'm going to learn a lot, is my guess. Like I've been doing that for years. Uh-oh, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's scary because it's like it's alarming when you realize like, oh shit, like, one of the first ones was Teflon, right?
Yeah.
Teflon has got a grandson called PFAS,
Yeah.
and this is that slippery material. It's on receipts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
on that slippery glide dental floss.
Yeah.
This is proven carcinogenic,
Oh, great.
and
Yeah.
yet it's permeated throughout our society. So, man,
Congratulations on having this great show that people are talking about and listening to.
oh,
I'm really
thanks,
honored to
man.
be on it.
Oh yeah, well, it's, and I'm working on some TV shows that dive into some more of that stuff, and we've got a lot of backing, some from environmental to personal stuff, and kind of a problem solution kind of thing, like
Yeah.
pop the top. So I love this stuff, and
Yeah. I can
at the
tell,
end,
and you're well versed in it, and you're doing a real service to other people too. So let's do more stuff together, man.